Welcome to another episode of the Create Smarter podcast. I am Phil, today here with Jake and Connor. Hello, gentlemen. How are you today?
Doing well.
Good.
Now you owe me a soda.
Oh, did we?
Jinx.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke.
It's only fair.
So today, we're here talking about one of maybe the more underutilized or underrated types of content creation I think that we see, and that's roundtable discussions. And I want to talk about what that is and what it means, why it's an effective way to capture content, and some of the technical aspects that go into it when we work on those and how we make them work. So first and foremost, off the cuff, and I'm not looking for a definition here because I was thinking about this and it's actually, very simple. What is a roundtable discussion in video production terms?
It is a round table, and there's a discussion. Ultimately, we'll have multiple cameras and full setup with lights to make everyone look good and hopefully make the environment that they're actually in also look well. And it's pretty self-explanatory in the title.
May I draw your attention to our current environment?
More of
a rounded table with multiple cameras and microphones and isolated audio channels. You're going to have a discussion that's going to go on for some period of time. My point is podcasts really are, if you think about the medium, like podcasts are a roundtable discussion. So, when you talk about the type of roundtable discussions we've done, there's a little more, formal planning maybe that goes into it. But, if you're in a set, like a lot of professional podcasts are, that definitely qualifies. I think the thing that's interesting is some of the more famous current day podcasts are, think about like the New Heights podcast. It's people, sitting in front of a webcam or in front of a phone or something like that. But, some of the ones that I like, I've mentioned this before, the two of the New York Knicks host a podcast called The Roommates Show, and sometimes they're remote, but they're in person. They have a built-out set, and they can have guests on it. They can go and sit, and everyone has their own camera, and that qualifies. So, even just thinking about our podcasts and podcasts as a mechanism for it, it's a really good opportunity to capture long-form content and distribute it in lots of different ways.
Yeah. I think, the only difference I would say, and it's not even a negative, is I think the word, right, like podcast, you're afraid to have, it's either one host with one guest, two hosts with one guest, talking about the Kelsey's podcast and stuff. And I think a roundtable almost gives the creator a little more freedom to say, like, I'm going to have 8 people, whether it's a table or I'm thinking of, like, the barbershop with, like, LeBron. Like, that's a roundtable, right? Like, it's a panel, And I think that at the end of the day, it gives you a little more freedom to have more people, which to us equals more content.
Right. I do think panel discussion is another potential way to put it, but I do think that ultimately what we're talking about is getting a group of people sitting together and having a conversation that you're going to eavesdrop on and record. Yeah. And it's putting some production value around it and then thinking about the best ways to use it. The barbershop's a great example. One of the ones that I always point to from a quality and production standpoint that I think does a really, really good job is the Hollywood Reporter does a series of these.
The Actors Circle. And
often there are eight prominent actors on it. It's a large number of people. And it's really, really well produced. And the funny thing about that is you'll see quick clips from that reposted all over the internet for years and years to come. There was one with, Tom Hanks, and I don't remember who else was on it, but randomly I'll see just clips from that pop up on Reddit and in other places completely out of context. And that kind of makes my first point. One of the most valuable things about a roundtable is that you have a really long conversation from which to pull, relevant content. How do you approach, when you take on a project like this, what's your thought process in terms of deliverables? Obviously, there's the opportunity to have a long form if people are interested in it, but what's your approach when you get into an edit for something like this, thinking about what can I get out of this? How can I really, chop this down to the bone and get as much valuable stuff out of it as possible?
Yeah, you already covered one, and that's short form for sure. And especially where everything's going nowadays, short form is what I think most people go into a video project thinking about. But to your point is like, it's all about the content and the people who are going to watch it, the audience. But I see any roundtable discussion can have, at the least, some kind of long form, definitely a medium kind of content for, whether that's not social but YouTube or something like that, and then definitely those shorter clips. And when you get down to the minutia, the shorter stuff, you can get more niche, you can get more specific to a topic that you're trying to promote or trying to make content for. But I do think, talking about podcasts as we started out, there's definitely room for that longer form, and I think that medium is kind of a overlooked form as well.
One of the things we have the nice position of being in is that we get to be, creators, but we have a whole, behind the scenes group chat of ideas and inspiration that when we see something that we think is good, we share it among our team. Jake, I think you do a really good job of like finding content out in the world that is effective, that, you take inspiration from. As, the resident consumer creator, maybe, even though you're not on social media, I look at you as someone who definitely is plugged in and finds good examples. What do you see as valuable in terms of like the different ways that you can use this type of content from a roundtable discussion?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, when are you going to have, depending on the size of the table, when are you going to have X amount of like-minded individuals together, right? Like ultimately that lends itself to any topic revolving around the discussion to be used in, clip farm, for social. So the most effective, form of media that you can pull from it, I think, honestly, is finding your niche topic, finding the audience that niche topic goes to, and creating those 60-second clips out of it. And you can edit around, the discussion itself and edit from person to person. It can be a, isolated individual talking for 60 seconds. There's so many different ways that you'd be able to edit that large of content in order to kind of hit different audiences. So as long as you go into an edit with an idea like this is the audience, this is the niche that I want to absorb this content, then you can make that happen almost organically with this type of discussions.
Yeah, and I think, Connor, you've worked on a few different kind of examples of this for us, for clients, in terms of, a roundtable discussion that was for a nonprofit that featured, a patient and then members of their care team. That's an interesting example because that's a story that can be told in many different ways, and we've told that story in many different ways. So one way to tell that story is to sit each individual person down for an interview and talk to them, and that can be really effective, and it can be really, really, really effective in terms of getting emotion from people and things like that. But sometimes people struggle, in that setting to get the right words out or to open up to somebody that they don't know. One of the benefits of these roundtable conversations is getting people in a position where they just get to loosen up and relax. Can you talk a little bit to maybe in that setting where we were working with a nonprofit about how the subjects maybe reacted differently than they do when we're sitting them down and they're on the spot to provide everything in the form of an interview?
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's all about emotion and just being comfortable. I mean, there is the aspect of lights and cameras that people still get, weird about. But when you're down in this kind of, closer, more tight-knit conversation, you do get a little more vulnerable. And especially in that specific scenario, it was a patient, who, yes, we could have interviewed about his, rehab and his recovery, but having a conversation with the people who were directly involved in that recovery was great. Having the doctor there, remember that time, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes, it was so good that you were there for XYZ. And then having, I think we had also a nurse and the patient himself or whatever it was. But just having those sound bites or those memories or those stories that wouldn't come up in an interview that you and I would just, write questions for. This was more organic. This was more, you could say clippable, but just more, valuable content, I think, for the patient, one, but also for the audience that they'd eventually give it to.
I think you just touched on something really, really important, which is that when you have people who come in from a production team be the interviewers, we do everything we can to prepare,
yeah, of course.
And we work really hard to become experts. We are never going to have the same level of expertise with caring for someone who's, rehabilitating from a serious injury or illness as a doctor.
As the doctor who did it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
He's
you're
there.
almost allowing, and you're still there as a producer to help make sure we're getting what you need, but you're also kind of getting multiple other proxy interviewers to work with you to get that stuff out of people, which I think 100%. Is just a huge added benefit of content like this. You get the added benefit of people loosen up because they're not on the spot as the only person, but they're also getting asked really, really pointed questions from people they trust.
Yes.
And more to that point, Jake, Connor brought up, the lights and camera can be intimidating. I think one of the things that's most interesting from a production standpoint is when you're working with a really outgoing person, you've been on calls with them, they're really, energetic and gregarious, and they like to talk and they're smiling, and then you sit them down in front of the cameras with the lights and you got they're on one side and there's 10 people on the other side. It's them against a world of production people. And, again, there's a lot of strategies we employ to make those people comfortable and make it loose. But for some people, it's a challenging situation to say, lights, camera, people, microphones, and me, all on the other side of that wall. How have you seen people react in this roundtable setting that's maybe different from how they react in that setting when it's them against the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's you both have already kind of touched on it. It absolutely kind of breaks that wall. It allows people to be vulnerable, like you were saying, and you see a face that you're familiar with, right? Like one of us, you've seen us on the Zoom calls, but like you said, it's a different look when we're behind a camera asking questions. So being able to look at someone, say, I know this person, I follow this person on LinkedIn, I'm very well aware of what they interact with, and I know we align or we don't align. You know these people to some degree, and you know that you have something in common. That allows, I think, for people to really, really break that wall down, and it's strength in numbers too, right? Like when you're not the only one, like you're able to lean on other people. You're able to kind of look to the side, and you don't have to feel the pressure of answering every single question to your own, yourself and your own beliefs. So ultimately, it just allows for a much more organic conversation where I think you legitimately get better sound bites out of individuals.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think just the idea of having someone on your team, there's strength in numbers. You're sitting there and you're working on it together. And in this format, it still allows you to do that in a way that looks and feels natural on camera, as opposed to like sitting two people down for an interview side by side, both answering questions to an interviewer. That's a different feel than kind of eavesdropping. So I do think you get really natural answers from it.
I was going to say too, if I could just pop in. You mentioned something about the familiarity of the people, and getting everybody in one room too. It's cool. I think we've seen in a couple of examples of these people may not see each other on the daily basis, but for this one event, they've all come together to a space. So opposed to a podcast that might have a host or a panel with a host, I think to your point of it's not just on one person. They can share the freedom of, let's say us three sat down and I saw Phil all the time, but I haven't seen Jake in a long time. Even if Phil's the host, I can still, when it's my time to talk to Jake. We can have this one-on-one, and I'll ask them a question. I'll come around, and then you'll eventually round it back up for another, touch point or guide us in the right direction. But that's what I've seen in what we've done personally, and things like the Actors Roundtable and stuff is like the actual guests have opportunities to be the host for a minute and ask questions that they've wondered, and that I think gives the viewer just a different perspective. Absolutely. I think the way that I came into this was talking about this as almost a content creation hack. And, one of the things that we preach at 5tool is the idea of creating smarter. And it's one shoot, many pieces of content. This really is the way to get that done most effectively, right? Can you talk about, from a planning standpoint, whether it's the example we shared with, a nonprofit, or if it's thought leadership content? We've done some of those as well, where it's a really complex topic with many layers. Yeah. Can you talk about, from a planning standpoint, why this is an effective way to really want to execute on that mindset of one shoot, many pieces of content? Yeah, 100%. And I think it goes to a couple different things of who do you have on the panel, what topics do you want to cover, and what are the deliverables? Like, what are your goals out of this piece of content? So for the thought leadership one, it was a very tricky subject that us three wouldn't know much about. As we could do as much research as we want, but we wouldn't be interviewers good in that sense. So it was awesome that they had an expert at the table with three more experts talking about a variety of topics that all fall under the same umbrella. So I think I looked at that, at least from a content, and planning and the calls and whatnot, talking about, we really want to have, a couple pieces of content for this bucket, and that bucket. And, let's call those 3 long videos. Within those 3 long videos, you could have 2, medium videos and 5 shorter videos for every single one. So I think if you do your due diligence in planning and say, okay, this is the topics we want to cover, these are who we want to talk about what, or these are who we have on the round table. You come out at the end, if you plan correctly, with a plethora of information and content and just opportunities to share with your audience. Yeah, and I think just before we move on from it, specifically in the example that we're talking about, for that thought leadership content, I know you edited that. What's the result there? What can people expect? How many clips did you actually end up delivering for that, approximately? Yeah. I mean, we had it on a spreadsheet with links and stuff, and on my mind, I'm going through all the pages of different topics. So it was definitely a lot. And that's the fun of it, was they talked for quite a long time, and it was cool to just be able to, at the end of the day, look back and be like, wow, we do practice what we preach. We got a lot of content. So I would say probably at the end of the day, I think there was, what was it, 10 short clips, 5 medium clips, and 2 long clips, let's call it. So right there, that's, 15 pieces of content.
Right.
And if if you plan this correctly, like we were saying, that could be your content calendar for a whole year.
Yeah.
Or half a year at least.
Right.
Just to plan ahead and be like, we're going to use this stuff at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I just to jump off that, where you're talking about the medium form content, I think that gets forgotten for sure. I think everyone goes right to long content, and then everyone is so familiar with the short form content where you're just getting hit in the face with clips. You mentioned it, like the YouTube, that 10-minute span ends up being a very, very good piece of content. It can be, I should say. And it's incredibly digestible. And I think people, you could lose sight in that and just go, oh, we film for 2 hours. Oh, we might be able to pull 1 or 2 social. You film for 2 hours. You can maybe make 3 or 4 of those 10-minute clips. And that's, again, another form of content, as we continue to say, being able to pull many forms of content out of one shoot. It almost feels like it's endless as to how many different avenues you could go down.
I do think you make a good point that the idea of like the 10-minute clip is probably like pretty overlooked in 2025. Everyone is really obsessed with, for good reason, with the idea of those, the shorter the better, the shorter the better. Mm-hmm. I think it depends what industry you're into, but that whole idea of like the buyer's journey, whether you're in, fundraising and the buyer is like someone who you're trying to make the case that they're worth supporting, philanthropically, or if you're, appealing to consumers to try to get them to invest in a product, or if you're B2B and you're trying to get other businesses to, work with you, right? There is a time and a place for that short content to get noticed. But then there's a place further along that journey where it's like, well, make the case for me and explain this in more than 1 minute and like dive in a little bit more. And I think that 5 to 10 minute space is important for that, and it's very often overlooked. I might not have the time for an hour-long webinar. I might have noticed you already in that 1 minute clip, but now I want you to make the case to me in a way that's going to sell me and close the deal. I know, when we work with other partners in the AV space, I look for content like that medium form content of them explaining their process. We've put content like that together for ourselves on site at events. Here's how we did it, right? And explaining that process, because I believe it's valuable for people who might buy from you or work with you to understand that you know more than the surface level. Anyone can talk for 15 seconds.
Yeah, right. Especially if
and
it's
sound
on
smart.
A script.
But, yeah.
With AI,
but when you actually dive in, it's a little bit different.
Sure.
Yeah. To that point, I wanted to follow up with a question about scripting and how the approach for a roundtable conversation changes the idea of responding to questions. When we do interviews, no matter how much you tell people not to script answers, oftentimes I find that they've either physically written a script that they're trying to memorize, or they have like an idea of a script in their head. And that format of, an interviewer posing a question and them answering it can lend itself to that coming out very clunky. How do you see the roundtable kind of getting around that hurdle that people have of the pre-scripting in their minds and allowing them to approach it differently?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't say it any better. The amount of times you see people who are trying their best to memorize, these 60-second long answers that they've prepared, and it slows the whole process down, makes it far less efficient, and generally they don't get the answer they're looking to try to get. So I think this goes back even to what we were talking about the vulnerability that setting actually brings. It makes it so much easier for these, if it's kind of like the thought leader one that we were talking about a second ago, that allowed for a lot of those individuals to express truly what they feel and what they experience on their day-to-day basis in their occupation. And that can get lost when people are really trying to memorize something. They generally, you're just not going to be able to do it. And by doing that, you're going to stumble on your words. You're going to, flub a million times. You see that people hold conversations significantly longer without filler words. And so it generally ends up being a much smoother, much more fluid program in that setting specifically versus when people have scripted answers, giving them the freedom to not feel that they have to know everything, right? Like that allows for just organic. Again, we keep using that word, organic conversations, and I think it lends to it.
I want to touch on a couple of technical things before we wrap this up. So first of all, Connor, you mentioned, we recorded for that Thought Leader Roundtable for, a long time, and, an hour and a half. Now, the benefit of that is an interview takes a long time as well. Right. This is 4 people, right? And it's the same hour and a half, right? So it's for everyone involved outside of the production team who has to spend more time on it. For all of the participants, it's 12 to 1:30 and you're done.
Yeah.
Come in, sit down, put some powder on, get a glass of water, chat with each other, and then we're really talking about this. Everyone has this short time commitment, and the rest of the work falls on the production team. So like, there's work in prep to make sure people know what they're talking about, and there's work in post to make sure we're cutting it up correctly. But for the participants, it's one discrete time block, and we're done.
Yeah.
On top of that, Jake, one of the things that there are some complicated elements from production, and I think like it's important to talk about the ways that you make this work so that people understand like the burden falls on the production team really for this more than anyone else. From an audio standpoint, you have 6 people sitting down. Can you talk about some of the tools, hardware and software that we utilize to make sure that that comes across professionally, so that if somebody's coughing or there's people talking over each other, we're able to take that and turn it into something that works really well. So Jake's got this magic soundbite and we don't miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that all comes down to isolated audio. That is, every microphone that you see on this table, we are recording a track of just our individual voice. So for an example, like let's say someone is talking and they have this amazing soundbite. In the middle, someone has a coughing fit. That completely would ruin it if you were only recording just the main mix that would come out of all of these microphones. We will individually record each microphone to make sure that we're capturing the voice, hopefully, of just that one individual and not getting any bleed through from, Connor in this, we would be able to really just try to capture that one individual's message and try to not have any interference from anyone else.
And when you go in post, you can manipulate it and even clean it up even further.
Absolutely. It makes that process much faster and it makes it sound better, ultimately.
Yeah. And similarly, from a visual standpoint, Connor, what are some of the steps we take to allow people to feel comfortable in this setting but really capture it in a clean way? What are some of the things you've consistently worked on shoots like this?
Yeah, I think just having space is the first thing. It's not really visually wise, but talking about the people in general, is I'm looking around the room we're in right this second, and it totally works for us because it's a small podcast room, it's a small space, you don't need big things for cameras, but rooms that we've done roundtables in, you want to have the ability to have people walk in, kind of put their stuff to the side, get comfortable, and then enter the set, which I've always thought was helpful. But onto that, and going back to the isolated audio, it's always nice to have isolated cameras as well. Again, it falls on the production team, but having it, just thinking ahead, that pre-production of being like, okay, if we have 5 people, we're going to have 6 cameras or whatnot, one for everybody, and then an isolated one for each individual person, so that when we make those singular clips, those niche clips, and maybe the hope is that that person themselves shares it on their social and gets that audience involved, we'll have their clean isolated audio and a clean one-to-one camera for them to talk into or talk with, and I think that's always helped. And then my third and obviously favorite part is lighting. I think lighting's cool. A bigger space and a bigger set with more people on it allows you to do kind of fun things with lighting, filling from different sides, filling from the top, playing with the background, different colors. So I think this, opposed to an interview or a podcast or something like that, the round table gives you a lot of opportunity to have some fun, have some, give some creativity and, less boundaries that you're restricted to.
And some of the tools that are out there that we've used from a physical standpoint almost mimic rigging, right?
Right.
You're able to bring in a really heavy-duty stand and send up a light 10 feet and then send it out on a boom arm and kind of hang it over people in a way that counterweight it. But that's something that, you might think that's only possible in a studio, but we bring that kind of solution on site and kind of build a studio on site, right?
Yeah, having that ability to, again, it's all pre-production of talking with the client, working with the production team and the client to say, okay, are we going to your office? Are we going to a secondary location like a restaurant? Are we going to, a sound studio, a bigger studio that is set up for something like this? Like, we need to know what's going on so we can make the product look and sound the best with the equipment at hand.
And I think the cool thing about all of this is that, you're not necessarily limited by the space. In pretty much every office that I've been in, there is a space that would work as long as you had the time to prep. This room that we're in currently is what, a 10 by 10 room,
Looks
if that, about a 10 by 10 room, maybe 12 by 12.
A little bigger. But yeah, right around there.
And you make it work, and you
work,
could
sure.
have four or five people on this
Yeah.
desk. Now, if you're in a bigger space, obviously that gives you more flexibility, but there's very few offices that I've been in where there's not a space that would work for something like this.
And most of those spaces that you may look at and say, well, no, it's a conference room. We can't have a thing, think about it. It's a conference room. It's got tables and chairs. So I think working with the right people, you can definitely be creative and allow them to see a space that they might not think would work and turn it into. I mean, I'm thinking of, a kitchen, maybe where do people gather a lot that might not look like a studio, but with some right lighting and some right adjustments in audio, we could make that into a round table like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been a great conversation, a great roundtable discussion, if I don't say so myself.
You've been a great moderator.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So, yeah, if you'd like to work on your own roundtable conversation and figure out how to get a lot out of a short period of time in a video production, give us a shout, and we'll help you out. Connor, Jake, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
We will see you next time on the Create Smarter podcast.